In my K.O. overview video, I declared the device's killer feature actually has nothing to do with beats, and everything to do with the easy, immediate, and beautifully lo-fi sounding polyphonic chromatic playback. While chromatic sampling isn't unique to the K.O. the old school lo-fi quality, the extreme pitch range of over 6 octaves, and the near instant workflow make it the best implementation I've seen on a modern device. Today, I'll explain what makes polyphonic chromatic sampling so special, what you can do to get the best results, and then show several examples. In the simplest terms, chromatic sampling is a sampling method that focuses more on melody than percussion. Rather than sampling drum sounds, you sample a melodic instrument, which you can then play back at different pitches using a keyboard. In today's landscape of samplers with gigabytes of memory, the focus is often on large multi-sampling libraries that aim to capture the original instrument's character as accurately as possible. But what I find much more interesting is the way the classic samplers handled things. Back in the days of floppy disks, the idea of multi-sampling an instrument wasn't even on the table. Due to memory limitations, a sampler would instead take a single short sample and then pitch it by playing the sample back faster or slower. People like to dunk on the K.O.'s 64 megabyte sample RAM, but let's not forget that the iconic MPC-60 and S900 samplers had a whopping 750 kilobytes of memory. As often is the case, this limitation bred creativity. Clever hip-hop producers figured out they could speed up their records to shorten the required sample time. This change in playback speed, of course, increased the pitch, which they would later pitch back down on the sampler. A side effect of this workflow was the artifacts and aliasing and crunch that the 80s sampler's primitive pitching algorithms would impart. And so, the sound of hip-hop was born. There are a lot of reasons to get excited about chromatic sampling, but I'll try to distill it into a handful of examples here. First, it has a unique sound. I've already mentioned the artifacts imparted by the pitching algorithm. As an example, let's sample a quick note from the Grandmother. We'll low-pass it quite a bit so there isn't a lot of high-frequency content, and the pitching artifacts will be more obvious. Now, when I play the sound back at the same pitch I sampled it at, it pretty much sounds the same. But when I play a lower note, we can hear that lo-fi sparkle. This high-frequency sizzle is a major part of a sampler's character. Another reason to use chromatic sampling is that it just sounds different versus true polyphony. Here we have the MiniFreak, which is a polyphonic synthesizer and can play up to 6 notes at a time. So why would I bother to sample this if it's already polyphonic? Well, because playing back a single sample at multiple pitches sounds very different to playing a true polyphonic instrument with individually articulated voices. As an example, I'll sample a single note from the MiniFreak. Now I'll play the MiniFreak polyphonically. And then the K.O. polyphonically. That is a very different sound, much more lo-fi and dark. Another obvious reason for chromatic sampling is to make your monophonic synths polyphonic. The voice architectures of monosynths are often much more complex than polysynths and for much cheaper. So you can design very interesting mono patches and then play them back polyphonically on the K.O. Another big benefit of this sampling workflow is that everything becomes polyphonic. Any modulation or effects that work in the time domain will be duplicated and offset for more complex, lush sounds. To show this, we'll do a simple LFO to pitch. So now you can hear the LFO modulating the pitch, but it's doing it at the same rate for all voices, because even though the voices are polyphonic, the LFO modulation is monophonic. So we'll sample this into the K.O. And when I play the same chord on the K.O., you can hear the pitch of each note drifting independently. Now the original synth patch again. And the sampled version again. The sample is much more lush. The same concept applies to effects. Polyphonic effects are extremely rare in synths. Most synth effects are master effects that all of the voices pass through at once, no different than tacking on a guitar pedal after your synth. Let's see what happens when we sample the synth with the effect applied. So first, let's play a chord with the synth through the chorus. Pretty nice. Now let's play the same chord using the K.O. Just like with the LFO, we can hear that the chorus rate on the sampled version is different per voice. Here are some quick tips for best results. Sample high notes when you're looking for a darker sound. I like to do 2 or 3 octaves higher than the center octave I plan to play around, and I only need to sample a few seconds. This ensures I'm pitching down enough to get some good dark texture, and also keeps the file sizes small. Consider time-based effects and how they'll change across the note range. For each octave lower you play, all modulation and effects will halve in speed. So if you're sampling higher notes, you may have to set your rates higher than you'd expect. An overly fast filter LFO will be slow and mellow 3 octaves down. Because of the stretching over time that happens when you pitch your samples down, you are reducing your effective sample rate, which will result in a darker sound. Keep this tonal shift in mind when creating a patch for sampling, and don't start off too dark. If you want your sound to be even more lo-fi, record it in much lower volumes. This has a similar effect to recording at a lower bitrate since you are not utilizing all of your headroom. Cranking the gain after recording will bring up the sample level as well as the noise floor. Then you can slam it into the compressor to further emphasize the lo-fi grit. Now let's see some more chromatic sampling examples. I'll quick cut through the sound design process since that's not really the point of this video, but I'll do comparisons between the raw synth sound versus the sampled sound to highlight the differences. And remember, all of these examples are available for free download in the description below. We'll start with a classic Roland synth voice, smooth and perfect for polyphony. sampling the Grandmother can give bold Moog polyphony without the $7,000 price tag. The Mopho's complex voice architecture can yield some huge pads. The MiniFreak's macro oscillators make great sample fodder, and sampling in unison results in larger-than-life polyphony. The Perfourmer is the ultimate synth voice, yielding beautiful quad timbral samples.